You may have seen a relationship between fractions and decimals in the past. We're going to look at it from a perspective of a grid today. So that grid has 100 small squares in it, and we want to shade the fractional amount of the grid that's named here. But what I really want you to think about is how you know how to shade the grid, and then write the decimal name for each shaded region. So the first fractional amount we have is 3/4. So if you had a grid of 100 squares, how would you split it up into and show 3/4? Be sure you write the decimal name and explain how you chose the region to shade. The second one is 7/25. Same idea there. Figure out how you want to shade that 100 grid to represent 7/25. This is how I did it. You could have done it differently. I was going from a perspective of a student who doesn't necessarily know what the decimal is, but they do understand fractions, that 3/4 is equivalent to 3 copies of 1/4. So if I split the region into 4 equal pieces and shade 3 of them, I am showing 3/4. Since I know there are 25 small squares in each one of the regions, that would be 75 hundredths. So I wrote the fraction 75 hundredths, that's equivalent to 3/4, and I wrote the decimal name 75 hundredths, which is a 0, a decimal point, a 7, and a 5. The second one, I used my same splitting because I know those were groups of 25, and I shaded 7 out of each group of 25. So if I have 4 copies of 7, I have 28, and these are hundredths, so I have 28 hundredths. You may have shaded them differently, but that's how I chose to shade them. Here's a couple more. How about 3/5 or 11/20? What would you do for those? I split the region into 5 separate pieces and shaded 3 of them. Then I noticed that each region would have 20 small squares in it, so 3 copies of 20 would be 60 hundredths. The second one, I used my same splitting of 5 regions, but the reason I did it was because they were groups of 20, and then I shaded 11 in each group. So if I have 5 copies of 11, that is 55. I know they're hundredths, so 55 hundredths. So there's lots of different strategies to convert fractions to decimals, as well as percents, which is the next thing we're going to talk about. You think about how you would convert these. You might use proportional reasoning. You might use long division. Think about how you might do this. Here's my first 2. So 7/40, I thought if I can make that denominator a power of 10, then I can easily write my decimal and even my percent. So I multiplied by a unique 1, which in this case was 25/25, and I got 175 thousandths. And I know that's a decimal fraction, so I'm going to write it as a 0, decimal point, a 1, 7, and 5. We'll talk soon about how I converted it to a percent of 17.5%. A lot of you can probably see that I multiplied by 100. Number 2 was 5/6. I cannot easily make the denominator of 6 a power of 10, so I just did long division on this one. So I got a decimal point, an 8, and then my 3 repeated. So I wrote my decimal as 0, a decimal point, an 8 in the 10th spot, a 3 in the 100th spot with the line only over the 3. Again, we'll talk about it soon. How do I change that decimal to a percent? It would be 83 1/3%. 8/5, I could easily make a power of 10, So I multiplied by a unique 1 this time, 2 over 2, and I got 16 tenths. So I knew my number had to end in the tenths place, so it's 1 6/10. As a percent, it would be 160%. 3/7, I know with my denominator of a 7, that's going to be a repeating decimal, and I know it's going to repeat after 6 digits. So I did my long division, and I got 0, a decimal point, 428571, and that all repeats. When I changed it to a percent, I got 42 6/7%, and you can see where I got my 6/7 as my remainder for my percent. Here's converting from decimals to fractions and percents. The easiest way to convert decimals to fractions is to use place value, but it can be tricky if you're not careful. So we'll try these problems and see if you can explain your reasoning and justify your answers. The first one, I read that decimal as 125 thousandths. So I wrote 125 over 1,000 and simplified that to 1/8. The second one, 4 tenths, that's a decimal fraction as well, so 4 over 10 equals 2 over 5. This one gets a little bit trickier. So 0.3 repeating, you might have learned in repeating decimals that when I have that digit repeating, there must be a 9 in the denominator. In this case, it would be 3 over 9, which simplifies to 1/3. And the last one, 1 9/100, I could write it like that, or I could write 109 hundredths and then simplify it. So either way, that's your fraction. If you want it just as a fraction, it would be 109 over 100, because when I write it 1 9/100, that's technically a mixed number and not simply a fraction. I hope that helped you understand converting from fractions to decimals and decimals to fractions.